My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
Anne stood alone in the vault that night. The coronation robe glowed softly behind sealed glass, its deep purple velvet catching the dim light in a way that made the gold embroidery shimmer like something still alive. She placed her hands flat against the cold surface of the case and stood there without moving for a long time. Somewhere inside those folds of fabric was the weight of June 2nd, 1953, her mother ascending the steps of Westminster Abbey, 27 years old, carrying the full burden of a nation on her shoulders. The robe had been worn once and was never meant to be worn again. Yet hours earlier, it had been found folded inside a bag in someone else's wardrobe, and the woman who put it there had forged Elizabeth's signature to justify keeping it. But this story does not begin with Anne in the vault. It begins with a junior employee who opened a cabinet she was never supposed to touch. Elena worked in the Royal Wardrobe Management Division. She was not senior, she was not prominent, she was precise, quiet, and trained to handle items that carried more historical weight than most people would ever touch in a lifetime. In late January 2026, she received routine instructions to reorganize the secondary storage area within Queen Camilla's private dressing room at Clarence House ahead of an upcoming state banquet. The dressing room was not an ordinary wardrobe. It functioned more like a curated gallery of luxury: velvet cloaks, evening gowns, ceremonial pieces arranged with deliberate care. Elena worked methodically through the collection until she reached a concealed corner behind thick silk drapes. There, a small wall-mounted cabinet that was normally secured at all times stood slightly ajar. The key had been left in the lock. Elena opened it with the careful instincts of an archivist rather than the curiosity of someone looking for trouble. Inside was a rough-textured cream fabric bag that looked entirely out of place among the surrounding refinement. She brought it closer to the light. Embroidered across its surface in gold thread were the intertwined initials ERI. Elena was looking at the coronation robe worn by Queen Elizabeth II on June 2, 1953, the most sacred ceremonial artifact in modern British history, hidden in a cabinet inside a dressing room at Clarence House. She returned everything to its place, locked the cabinet, slipped the key into her pocket. That evening, she sat alone in her flat and began searching for a discreet way to contact Princess Anne's office at St. James's Palace. The confidential report arrived on Anne's desk before dawn, an unmarked envelope with no official insignia, carrying only a discreet internal cipher. Anne was already awake, following her lifelong discipline of rising before the rest of the palace stirred. As she read the contents, a coarse fabric bag bearing the initials ERE, discovered at Clarence House, the room fell into the kind of silence that only forms when something genuinely serious has been placed on a surface and cannot be picked up casually. Anne was not easily unsettled. She had navigated decades of royal turbulence without losing composure once. But this struck at something deeper than institutional protocol. This was her mother's coronation robe, the garment that symbolized the most solemn oath between monarch and nation. Its removal from secure custody was not a minor oversight. It was a deliberate act. She retrieved a notebook she had personally compiled alongside experts after her mother's passing. Page 42 contained the entry, "Robe of Estate, 1953," clearly marked as sealed and transferred to a classified storage facility at Windsor. The protocols were unambiguous. The robe had been moved without authorization. By 6 o'clock, Anne was dressed in a dark tailored suit with a small crown-shaped brooch pinned to her lapel. A black car waited in the courtyard. She had already assembled a select group of senior security personnel. Then she moved forward. The cabinet was opened in front of officers. The bag was removed. When the preservation specialists unzipped it and the deep purple velvet caught the room's light, time seemed to compress. The gold embroidery shimmered. The pearls remained perfectly intact. The original maker's label confirmed exactly what everyone in the room already knew. Anne's eyes moved slowly from the robe to Camilla. In that brief exchange, something shifted permanently in the space between them. Camilla did not collapse. She did not plead or panic. Instead, she gave a discreet signal to her personal secretary, who stepped forward carrying a refined leather case. From it, Camilla withdrew a collection of aged documents, yellowed pages bearing the unmistakable appearance of archival royal records. She placed them on the table with careful deliberation. The final page carried an elaborate signature. Elizabeth R. Camilla presented this as evidence that the late queen had privately granted her the coronation robe as a final act of succession. Every detail had been meticulously prepared: ink, wax seals, parchment quality, designed to withstand scrutiny. She watched Anne closely, expecting hesitation, expecting the emotional weight of their mother's handwriting to create enough doubt to stall immediate action. Anne did not reach for the documents. She did not show uncertainty. Instead, she reached into her coat and produced a small envelope of preserved green silk. From it, she removed an original document bearing the authentic signature of Queen Elizabeth II, a paper entrusted to her during the Queen's final days at Balmoral. The document was a codicil to the National Treasures Protocol. Its language was unambiguous. The coronation robe of 1953 was an inseparable historical artifact to be permanently housed within the National Archives. It had been worn once and was never to be transferred to any individual regardless of rank. Anne placed it beside Camilla's version on the table. Side by side, the forgery became visible through a single detail that no amount of professional counterfeiting could replicate. The signature on Camilla's document lacked the characteristic pressure mark on the letter R, a subtle but defining feature that only someone who had watched Elizabeth sign thousands of documents across decades would ever recognize. Anne looked at Camilla. She did not need to speak. The genuine document was judgment enough. Camilla's composure fractured completely. Her legal advisor stepped back instinctively. The forged manuscript that she had believed was her strongest defense now lay exposed as her most damaging mistake, an attempt to falsify the will of the late queen in front of the one person most qualified to detect the deception. The coronation robe was sealed into a specialized preservation case under Anne's direct supervision. Officers documented the scene with photographs and compiled a formal report. Their movements were precise and detached, treating Camilla not as the authority of the residence, but as the subject of an investigation. The armored convoy departed Clarence House in silence. At the palace's secure storage vault, conservation specialists were already prepared. The robe was carefully unfolded across an examination table under specialized lighting. Anne personally verified every detail before the artifact was sealed within a vacuum-protected glass enclosure equipped with advanced temperature controls and layered security. Only after the final seal was applied did Anne allow her posture to ease slightly. Back at Clarence House, the consequences unfolded without public announcement. Camilla's legal advisors and key staff were suspended pending investigation. Her upcoming appearances were significantly reduced, officially attributed to health concerns, understood by everyone inside the palace as a disciplined form of confinement within royal protocol. That evening, after everyone had departed, Anne returned to the vault alone. In the dim light, the coronation robe seemed almost alive, its purple velvet catching whatever illumination reached it, the gold thread carrying the faintest shimmer. She stood before the glass case and placed her hands flat against its surface. The cold pressed back against her palms. Behind that barrier lay the garment her mother had worn at 27 years old, ascending the steps of Westminster Abbey to accept a burden that would define every remaining day of her life. Worn once, never to be worn again. That was the covenant. Someone had tried to break that covenant, had hidden the robe in a wardrobe, had forged a signature to justify keeping it, had planned to descend a grand staircase wearing it before cameras and dignitaries, as if the authority it represented could simply be claimed by putting it on. Anne understood something in that moment that went beyond the recovery of an artifact. True authority was never contained in symbols. It lived in the principles those symbols were created to represent. The robe could be locked away forever, and the oath it embodied would still hold. Because the oath was not made of velvet and gold, it was made of sacrifice and duty, and those could not be stolen. She lowered her hands from the glass and stepped back. The vault door closed behind her with a sound that felt less like an ending and more like a restoration. The robe was home. The forgery was exposed. And somewhere in the silence of Clarence House, the woman who had tried to wear another queen's legacy was learning the difference between possessing a symbol